G'day viewers, my name is Michael and welcome to this first discussion piece for SingleRacer. Now I'll be setting up a separate dedicated playlist for any sim racing discussions and topics, and if you have any suggestions you're welcome to add them to the comments below. And I almost didn't do this video because I'm embarrassed on two fronts. The first where I feel like a dill was after watching a real life review of the car I was calling the Expo, only to find out it's called the Crossbow. But to me, that's like saying my name is Tomato, but you pronounce it Peach. I mean, really, it's just crazy, but I still feel like a dill anyway. And the second reason for my embarrassment was because I literally had an epiphany over the weekend while racing online. Someone gave me a bit of advice, like virtually a throwaway line, that made me realise I might have been driving for 27 years, technically the wrong way. Now I say 27 years because the first game I ever remember racing on a PC was a game called Stunts. I can't remember any games before that, so that was released in 1990, which makes it, of course, 27 years up to this year. And so I want to start today's discussion piece with the simple question: can changing gears slightly earlier make you faster? Well, it certainly did for me, and although I'm embarrassed about it to think I might have been driving the wrong way for all this time, I felt it was just too important not to share for other beginner drivers, intermediate drivers, and even people like my brother who I think do the same thing. Now, this only applies to the game currently Assetto Corsa. I don't know if this would apply to other games. My brother and I had a quick race Project Cars today, and I don't think that's advanced enough to really notice the difference, or it doesn't give you readouts well enough to let you change the way you do in Assetto Corsa. But what I'll do is I'll discuss how this came about. I'll show you some visual examples of why this might apply, and then I'll show you two quick videos to compare my old style and my new style. Now, where this was an epiphany, that might sound like an over-exaggeration, but from the moment the person told me this bit of advice, I drive 5 cars that are my regular go-to cars online, and in 4 of those cars, there were 4 that I was able to access over the weekend. I broke records in every single car just by changing slightly this way of driving. And in my preferred car, which is the Ferrari GT2 car, I knocked 4 seconds off my personal best record. And so even though I'm slightly embarrassed about the fact that I consider myself at the very top end of, say, intermediate level, or at the very bottom end of pro level if you take into account that I drive with no aids and manual and can drive some of the old classic harder cars to drive pretty well, then at the end of my Audi versus Crossbow video, I talk a little bit about the fact that even as a better driver, you've got to be open to taking criticism and realising your mistakes and trying to improve. And that's what this channel is all about. So with that in mind, I'll set up now how this came about. Now, I've got this still here. This is the still from my How to Set Up Assetto Corsa app video, and this is my normal layout. And one of the things that I have open, or two of the things actually, is the chat and the leaderboard. Now, I did this over the weekend. I was racing online and I had chat open. And the reason I have the leaderboard open is because if you do it constantly, you get familiar with the drivers. And this was the case over the weekend. I had one of the drivers that I started to know pretty well, and we used chat to communicate. And he was following behind me, and I really enjoy doing this, where the guy has more ability than you, a better car than you, and he pushes you harder and harder, but it makes you do a better lap. And this was the case. And what happened was I said, I hope I'm not holding you up because I can't match your time. And I said, even my best time in this car, which was the Ferrari GT2 car, would not beat his car. He was driving the BMW GT3 car. So there was no way I was ever going to catch him, and I didn't want to particularly hold him up. And so in the chat, he said this throwaway line, which was the comment, "Make sure you change before the red line." And I stopped and I thought about it, and it made such logical sense, but for sim racing, I couldn't understand why I wasn't doing it. In other words, in my normal road car, I would never go over into the red line. I mean, some people I'm sure do, but you know, you don't want to damage the engine by doing it in your real life car. So why am I doing it in game? And so if you take this example here of a pretty standard road car, you can see it's logical to think both power and torque, there where the mouse is falls off when you hit the red line, or I assume in most cars. You know, I'm guessing. I don't know much about setups or engineering or anything like that. But naturally, you would just assume that in a real life car, they would make the red line where the power drops off dramatically here. So you can see between 6,000 and 7,000 revs how much it drops off. And so I couldn't understand what was my thinking that I would just rev it out to not only the red line, but up to where it ends and then change gears. Now, I won't mention the driver because I probably couldn't anyway, because he's got one of those password names that are like a combination of capital letters and numbers. But when he was chasing me, I don't know how he could tell, or if it's just something he says to a lot of people. But my guess is that he might have heard my revving. You know, we all drive the GT cars, those high performance cars, and maybe you get used to the sound, and he could hear that I was revving it to the absolute rev line and then changing, that he would give me the comment, "Make sure you change before the red line." So let me give you a picture example. This is a freeze frame of my previous best hot lap, and here I've reached the highest point before taking this corner. And so the implication is that the way I understood his throwaway line of "Are you changing before the red line?" is that, as you can see here in the still picture, that I'm right at the end of the red line tacho where I change to the next gear. So I've hit the limiter and then I change. But if I show you this next picture that I've highlighted in the green, his implication to me would be that by coming up to the red of any gear and then changing before it goes further into the red, the green section would be the next gear where you have more available power than the gear before, because by being in the red and hitting the absolute peak of that red, I'm actually losing power and losing speed. So I did an experiment. As soon as he said the line, I did an experiment, and I was very lucky because like I said, I have those 5 go-to cars, and 4 of them were available over this weekend. And I was able to beat my time by using this technique for all 4 of those cars. Now, 2 of them were slow, normal road cars, and 2 of them were the GT performance cars. But it didn't seem to matter. It affected all of them, and I was able to drive faster in all of them. Now, there are 3 examples where this wouldn't apply. So the obvious one would be the final gear. And one of the reasons, now I did my first online race, a proper race where you qualify and do the race, and I qualified 8th, which I thought was terrific given that I didn't know the track that well, and I'm racing against people that probably do this all the time. But I qualified 8th because I understood that when you tune the gears, you want the final gear on the whatever is the main straight to hit its peak right at the end of the straight. In fact, what I do is I make it so that it hits the gear slightly before the end of the straight, so I'm kind of at the end of the straight. And what that means then is all other gears have slightly more pull out of the corners. So I tend to be faster out of the corners because I lower the gears and just sacrifice that one little bit at the end of the straight, and that makes me faster. The other one is when you change down. When you change down, you want to use the red line in that lower gear as a brake aid. I can get through a corner quite faster by using that downshift and using the brake of the engine as a help to my natural braking. And finally, the third one is an example where Nordschleifer is a great case for that, where you're approaching a corner and you're in the gear and you've hit or you're getting to that red line, but to just before the corner to change up and then straight away back down again doesn't serve a purpose. It probably upsets the car. So in that case, I do still leave it in the lower gear, go in the red, and to better go into the corner in that same gear and then change up from there. And so finally, the only way to end this discussion piece is to show you a visual example of exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I'll be using the free VLC player that you can get online, only because it'll help me pause the video and go frame by frame at the end. But also, this first video is my previous best hot lap in the Ferrari at Nordschleifer, the Ferrari GT2 car, and it shows how on each gear I rev it to the full extent of the red line and only change when it hits the end of the tacho into the next gear. So let me start the video, and here I go on the approach to this long straight, and it's the end of the video that's the most important. So if you see here in the middle of the picture, I'm revving each gear right to the end of the red line. And for the 27 years, I honestly thought that was the best thing where you're getting the most power. But the suggestion of the person online was that if I changed just as it hit the red, as it goes to the next gear, I would have more power available and therefore a higher speed. So if I pause that now and I go frame by frame, I'll let it run a bit. I think it's 274. There it is. 274 is the highest that I hit in this hot lap. And then I lose power, of course, because I'm preparing for the next corner. So if we go out of that, and now from learning from that and taking his advice and changing to the next gear as it hits the red line, here we give the same corner. So now as I approach, or for the whole track I am changing gear just as it hits the red line. It's a little bit hard to look at the tacho, but I try and do it as close to the line as possible. See, here I already feel I have more speed. It was totally something you could sense. And not only that, but it actually seemed to make the car easier to drive. I made a comment to Alex at the Extra Mile that I was struggling with the more twitchier cars because I couldn't control them, and maybe this is why. So if I let that go here, and now we go 274, see now I've already hit 280. Now, admittedly, you can't compare one single lap to another, and that's why I'm explaining about the 4 cars, is that it was tangible right through all 4 cars. I noticed the difference, and I was much, much faster just by doing that simple trick. And so, to wrap up, as embarrassed as I might be about driving for 27 years using that technique, The thing is still always about learning. I always want to be a better sim racer. I really enjoy Sean Cole's channel, The Sim Pit, based on that premise that you can always improve. No matter how good you get, you can always be open to other people and learn from their ideas or their techniques. My brother has a totally different technique to myself, and that's how we improve against each other. So I hope this helps someone. If you like what I'm doing, please subscribe. If it's beneficial to you, all the better. And I hope to see you next time. See ya.